Millionaire CEO saw twins crying in desperation. Their truth changed his life forever. "Are you lost?" Jackson asked, his voice softer than he'd used in years. The girl looked up with eyes the color of storm clouds. "We're waiting for Mr. Remington." Jackson's blood turned to ice water. "What do you want with him?" "Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story." The 42nd floor of Manhattan's financial district offered a view that most men would kill for, but Jackson Remington barely glanced up from his mahogany desk as the December blizzard began its assault on the city below. At 49, he commanded Remington Capital Partners with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a general. His steel-gray eyes had witnessed more corporate executions than most people saw movies, and his silver-touched hair spoke of battles won in boardrooms where fortunes lived and died. The Mont Blanc pen in his manicured fingers had signed documents that moved millions, destroyed competitors, and built an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Today's stack of foreclosure approvals was just another Tuesday afternoon, each signature as mechanical as breathing. "Mr. Remington," his assistant Victoria's voice crackled through the intercom, "the Riverside Properties portfolio review is complete. Shall I send it to your home office?" Jackson's Italian leather chair creaked as he leaned back, watching the snow begin to stick to his floor-to-ceiling windows. Even titans of industry knew when nature demanded retreat. "Send it over. I'm leaving early tonight." The elevator descended through 42 floors of power and privilege, depositing him into the marble lobby where his reflection caught in the polished surfaces a man carved from ambition itself. His Armani suit cost more than most people's monthly salary. His Patek Philippe watch could fund a small business, and his net worth had crossed 9 figures last quarter. Yet as he stepped onto Madison Avenue, the Arctic wind cut through his cashmere coat like a blade of judgment. The familiar weight of success felt meaningless against nature's fury. He quickened his pace toward the executive garage 3 blocks away, where his Tesla waited in climate-controlled comfort. The storm was worsening, and even masters of the universe knew when to retreat. That's when he saw them. 2 small figures pressed against the granite facade of his building's ground floor, barely visible through the swirling white chaos. Street children weren't uncommon in the city, but something about their stillness made him pause. They weren't begging or crying or creating the usual urban disturbance. They simply sat, sharing what little warmth 2 small bodies could generate, watching the storm with the patience of those who had learned to expect nothing. Against every instinct honed by decades of urban survival, Jackson approached. The twins couldn't have been older than 7. The boy wore a jacket with holes at the elbows, while the girl clutched a threadbare doll missing one eye. Neither was crying, which somehow made the scene more heartbreaking. They simply existed in the storm, 2 small islands of resignation in a sea of chaos. "Are you lost?" Jackson asked, his voice softer than he'd used in years. The girl looked up with eyes the color of storm clouds. "We're waiting for Mr. Remington." Jackson's blood turned to ice water. "What do you want with him?" The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small canvas bag, the kind banks once used for coin deposits. It clinked softly as he held it out with the solemnity of a religious offering. "We came to give this back to him. It's Grandma Margaret's payment. She said we should always pay our debts." The name hit Jackson like a physical blow. Margaret. How many Margarets could there be in his recent business dealings? But deep in his chest, something already knew. "Margaret Daniels," the girl confirmed, her voice carrying the weight of loss. "She died this morning. In the cold apartment where we had to move after Mr. Remington took our house. She made us promise to bring this to him." The world tilted on its axis. Jackson gripped the building's wall for support, his mind racing back 38 years to a small classroom in Queens. A young teacher with kind eyes and gentle hands had quietly slipped lunch money into his desk when his mother couldn't afford the school meal program. Margaret Daniels. The woman who had seen potential in a scrappy kid from the projects and nurtured it with patience and sandwiches cut into perfect triangles. The woman he had just killed. The twins stared at him with those familiar gray eyes, and Jackson saw now what he had missed before, the stubborn set of their chins, the way they held themselves with quiet dignity despite their circumstances. They were Margaret's grandchildren, and he had made them orphans. "What are your names?" he whispered. "I'm Luna," the girl said. "This is Leo. Are you Mr. Remington?" Jackson nodded, unable to speak. Luna stood and held out the bag of coins with the gravity of a funeral ritual. "Grandma said she owed you $11 from when she couldn't make the full payment last month. She saved this from her medicine money." The bag felt impossibly heavy in Jackson's hands. $11. Probably scraped together from skipped meals and canceled prescriptions. He thought of the foreclosure file on his desk, a modest two-bedroom house in Queens, worth perhaps $180,000, carrying a mortgage balance of $43,000 after 22 years of faithful payments. Margaret had fallen behind by exactly $2,847 when her pension was reduced. His firm had foreclosed for the land value, planning to flip it to a developer for luxury condos. Standard business. Profitable margins. Cold efficiency. Murder by spreadsheet. Come with me, Jackson said suddenly. You can't stay out here. Leo shook his head. We're not supposed to go with strangers. I'm not a stranger, Jackson said, though the words felt like shards of glass in his throat. I knew your grandmother. She was my teacher. Luna's eyes widened with recognition. She talked about her students sometimes. She said some of them became very successful. The irony was crushing. Jackson had indeed become successful enough to destroy the woman who had helped create that success. He knelt in the snow, bringing himself to their eye level. Your grandmother was right to be proud. She helped make me who I am today. The statement carried a bitter double meaning only he could hear. But right now you need somewhere warm to stay. Do you have family? Anyone who can take care of you? Leo and Luna exchanged glances with the practiced communication of twins. There's our Uncle Danny, Luna said hesitantly. But he lives far away and we don't have his phone number. Grandma said he was finding himself in California. What about your parents? Mama died when we were babies, Leo said with the matter-of-fact tone children use for incomprehensible tragedies. We don't remember her. And Papa? Grandma said he went to heaven too, but she got sad when we asked questions. Orphans. Margaret had been raising them alone on a teacher's pension and he had stripped away their final security. Jackson made a decision that would have baffled his business associates. You're coming home with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to reach your uncle. But we don't know you, Luna protested. Jackson opened his wallet and pulled out his business card, flipping it to show the small corporate headshot on the back. Your grandmother kept pictures of all her students who made something of themselves. I bet she had one of me. Did she ever tell you about little Jackie Remington? Recognition dawned in Luna's eyes like sunrise. The boy who couldn't afford lunch. She said you grew up to help people with their money. If only she knew how he helped them, right out of their homes and into the street. Jackson's penthouse apartment felt like a mausoleum as he led the twins inside. 2,400 square feet of marble and chrome, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, museum-quality art on the walls, and not a single trace of warmth or humanity. The twins stood in the foyer, overwhelmed by the grandeur that surrounded them. Are you a king? Leo whispered. No, just someone who forgot where he came from, Jackson replied. He ordered Chinese food while the twins explored, their voices echoing through rooms that hadn't heard laughter in years. Jackson lived alone, had always lived alone, by choice. Relationships were complications, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. He'd learned that lesson early and buried it deep. But watching Luna carefully arrange her one-eyed doll on his $15,000 Italian sofa, seeing Leo press his face against the windows to watch the snow fall over the city lights, Jackson felt something crack in his chest. A warmth he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. Over dinner, the twins told him about their life with Grandma Margaret. How she made pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday mornings. How she helped them with homework at the kitchen table every night. How she tucked them in with stories about her students who had grown up to change the world. She always said education was the key to everything, Luna said, carefully counting out her lo mein noodles. She wanted us to go to college someday, like you did. Jackson nearly choked on his food. She told you about my college? She said you were the smartest boy in her class, but you were angry a lot. She said you had a hard life at home, but she knew you'd do great things. Leo paused, studying Jackson's face with unsettling intensity. She was right, wasn't she? You must do really great things to have a house like this. Great things. Jackson thought about the families he'd displaced, the small businesses he'd crushed, the communities he'd gentrified for profit. Margaret had seen potential for greatness in him, and he'd used that potential to become exactly the kind of person who would destroy her. After dinner, he set up the guest rooms and found some of his old clothes for the twins to sleep in. As he tucked them in, Luna grabbed his hand with surprising strength. Mr. Remington? Are you sad about Grandma Margaret too? Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, unable to trust his voice. Finally, he managed, Yes, Luna. I'm very sad. She used to say that when people we love go to heaven, they send us guardian angels to help us. Maybe she sent you to help us. The innocence of her faith was devastating. Jackson kissed her forehead, a gesture he'd never made in his adult life, and retreated to his study, where he poured 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch and stared at the foreclosure files scattered across his desk. He found Margaret's file and opened it with trembling hands. There was her photo from the mortgage application, 23 years old. She looked older than he remembered, but her eyes still held that same kind intelligence that had seen through his childhood anger to the scared boy beneath. The application showed her income $2,847 per month from her pension. The house payment was $1,200. After utilities, groceries, and the twins' needs, she would have had perhaps $300 left for emergencies. When her pension was cut by $400 monthly due to budget shortfalls, she had no margin for error. Jackson pulled out his laptop and began researching. Margaret Daniels, age 73, had taught elementary school for 41 years. She'd won Teacher of the Year 3 times, started an after-school reading program that still operated in 4 schools, and had mentored hundreds of at-risk children. The more Jackson read, the heavier the weight in his chest became. This wasn't just about foreclosing on his old teacher. This was about destroying a saint. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Richard Hawthorne. Great numbers on the Riverside Properties flip. The Daniels house should net us $140K profit once the developer closes. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? Jackson stared at the message until the words blurred. $140,000. Enough to fund college educations for a dozen kids like he'd been. Enough to keep an elderly teacher in her home for the rest of her life. He traded it all for profit margins. Jackson couldn't sleep. He stood in his kitchen at 3 a.m. staring at the bag of coins Luna had given him. $11 collected with the determination of someone who had never forgotten a debt. He thought of his own debts, not the financial ones, but the moral obligations that had shaped him into the man he'd become. Or the man he'd failed to become. He opened his laptop and began searching for his elementary school records, tracking down other students from Margaret's classes. What he found shattered him further. Tommy Martinez, who'd struggled with reading, was now a published author of children's books. Margaret had stayed after school with him every day for 2 years, teaching him phonics with endless patience. Angela Washington, whose parents worked 3 jobs between them, had become a pediatric surgeon. Margaret had driven her to the library every Saturday for 4 years, helping her with science projects and college applications. David Chin, who'd been bullied for his accent, was now a successful engineer. Margaret had taught him that his difference was a strength, not a weakness. Story after story of lives transformed by one teacher's dedication. And Jackson? He'd used his transformation to become the villain in someone else's story. His reflection was interrupted by a soft sound from the guest wing. He found Luna standing in the hallway, clutching her doll. "I can't sleep," she whispered. "I keep thinking Grandma's going to come kiss me goodnight." Jackson knelt beside her. "I lost someone important to me once too. The hurt doesn't go away, but it gets easier to carry." "Who did you lose?" Jackson hesitated. "My mother. When I was about your age." It wasn't entirely true. His mother had died when he was 15, and their relationship had been complicated by poverty and her struggles with addiction. But the emotional truth remained. He'd learned early that love was temporary and trust was dangerous. "Is that why you don't have kids?" Luna asked with the directness only children possess. "I suppose so. I decided it was safer to be alone." Luna studied him with those storm-gray eyes. "Grandma used to say that being alone might be safer, but it's not better. She said people need people like flowers need sunshine." Margaret's wisdom delivered by a 7-year-old in dinosaur pajamas at 3 in the morning. Jackson felt another crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "Would you like me to read you a story?" he found himself asking. Luna nodded eagerly. They settled into the overstuffed chair in his study, and Jackson read from a collection of fairy tales he'd purchased years ago as decoration but never opened. As Luna's breathing grew steady against his chest, Jackson realized he was experiencing something he denied himself for 40 years. The simple peace of caring for someone else. When he finally tucked her back into bed, Luna grabbed his hand again. "Mr. Remington? Grandma always said that sometimes God uses broken people to fix other broken people. Maybe that's why you found us." Jackson returned to his study, but not to work. Instead, he pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing. Not contracts or foreclosure notices, but memories. Every kindness Margaret had shown him, every sacrifice she'd made for her students. every life she'd touched with grace and generosity. By dawn, he had filled 12 pages with the story of a teacher who had seen potential in an angry, hungry boy and nurtured it with patient love. A woman who had given everything to help others succeed, only to be destroyed by one of those very students when she needed help herself. The irony was crushing, but it was also clarifying. Jackson had a choice to make. The next morning brought unexpected complications that would change everything. Jackson was preparing breakfast when his doorman called to announce visitors, a social worker from Child Protective Services and a police detective. "Mr. Remington," said Detective Maria Rodriguez as Jackson met them in the lobby, "we need to speak with you about Luna and Leo Daniels. Their school reported them missing yesterday." Jackson's blood ran cold. "They're safe. They're with me." The social worker, a thin woman named Patricia Mills, frowned at her tablet. "Sir, you can't just take custody of unrelated minors without proper procedures. We need to." "They're not unrelated," Jackson interrupted, then caught himself. "Legally, they weren't related to him at all. I mean, I knew their grandmother. She was my teacher. The children came to me for help." "In the middle of a snowstorm?" Detective Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a coincidence." Jackson realized how the situation must look, a wealthy bachelor with 2 orphaned children he claimed barely knew. "Look, Margaret Daniels died yesterday. The twins were left alone. They came to my office building looking for me specifically. I couldn't leave them on the street." Ms. Mills consulted her tablet with bureaucratic efficiency. "According to our records, the minors have a legal guardian listed, their uncle, Daniel Carver, in San Francisco. We've been trying to reach him." "Have you found him?" "Not yet. His last known address was a homeless shelter. But Mr. Remington, regardless of your good intentions, you cannot house these children without proper authorization. We'll need to place them in temporary foster care until we locate their guardian." "No." The word came out harder than Jackson intended. "They've been through enough trauma. They need stability, not to be shuffled between strangers." Detective Rodriguez studied him with cop's eyes that had seen every kind of lie. "Mr. Remington, what exactly is your relationship to the deceased, Margaret Daniels?" The question Jackson had been dreading. He could lie, keep his involvement in Margaret's death secret, or he could face the truth. "She was my first grade teacher at PS 142 in Queens, 42 years ago. Jackson's voice caught. "She helped me when my family couldn't afford school lunches. She saw potential in me and encouraged me to pursue education." "And you maintained contact with her over the years?" "No. I lost touch after elementary school. I didn't even know she was still alive until—" Jackson stopped himself before admitting he'd seen her name on foreclosure documents. Ms. Mills softened slightly. "That's actually quite touching, Mr. Remington. It speaks well of you that you'd help the children of a teacher who influenced you. But we still need to follow proper procedures." "What would those procedures involve?" "Temporary placement with a licensed foster family while we conduct a background check on you and search for the uncle. If you're serious about providing care, you could apply to become an emergency guardian, but that process takes time." Jackson thought of Luna and Leo upstairs, probably just waking up in the first safe place they'd known since Margaret's death. The idea of strangers taking them away felt like another violence. "How long would the background check take?" "Typically 2 to 3 weeks for emergency guardianship approval," Ms. Mills replied. "Given your financial resources and lack of criminal record, you'd likely be approved, but I'll pay for expedited processing, whatever it costs." Detective Rodriguez looked intrigued. "Mr. Remington, you seem very invested in these children for someone who just met them. Is there something else you're not telling us?" Jackson felt the weight of his secret pressing against his ribs. If he admitted his role in Margaret's death, he'd likely face legal consequences. But more importantly, the twins would learn that their guardian angel was actually the person responsible for their grandmother's death. "I told you everything relevant," he said carefully. "Margaret Daniels was an exceptional teacher who influenced many students' lives. I'm in a position to help her grandchildren, and I intend to do so." After more discussion and paperwork, they reached a compromise. Jackson would be allowed to care for the twins temporarily while expedited background checks were conducted, provided he agreed to daily check-ins with social services and supervised visits. It wasn't ideal, but it kept the children out of the foster system. As the officials left, Jackson realized his life had just changed irrevocably. He was no longer just Jackson Remington, master of the financial universe. He was now responsible for two small lives that had been shattered by his own actions. The weight of that responsibility was terrifying and strangely liberating. Later that morning, Jackson sat across from his business partner Richard Hawthorne in their usual corner booth at the Metropolitan Club. Richard, a sharp-featured man with calculating eyes, was reviewing the quarterly reports with obvious satisfaction. Exceptional numbers, Jackson. The Riverside Properties portfolio alone netted us $12 million in profit. The Daniels foreclosure was particularly sweet. We paid $43,000 for the house and land, and the developers already offered us $185,000 for the lot. Jackson pushed his untouched Eggs Benedict around his plate. Tell me about the Daniels case specifically. Richard pulled out his tablet, scrolling through files with practiced efficiency. Standard foreclosure. Elderly woman, teacher's pension, fell behind on payments when her income was reduced. We offered her a payment plan, but she couldn't meet the terms. Property had good bones, excellent location for development. Clean transaction. Did you meet her personally? The old lady? No, my assistant handled the final notices. Why the interest? It's a closed file. Jackson thought about Luna and Leo upstairs in his penthouse, probably eating cereal from bowls worth more than Margaret's weekly grocery budget. The woman was my elementary school teacher. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? What are the odds? Did you know when we filed? No, I just discovered it. Jackson paused, knowing his next question might raise suspicions. Was there any way we could have worked with her? Extended the payment plan, reduced the principal. Jackson, we're not a charity. She owed $47,000 total, including fees and penalties. At her income level, she'd have needed 15 years to pay it off, assuming she never missed another payment. The math didn't work, but the house was worth more than the debt, which is exactly why it was good business. Look, I get that you're feeling sentimental about your old teacher, but you can't let emotions cloud your judgment. We have fiduciary responsibilities to our investors. Jackson knew Richard was right from a business perspective, but sitting across from his partner, watching him dismiss Margaret's death as a successful transaction, Jackson felt nauseated. What if I told you she had dependents? 2 young grandchildren she was raising? Richard shrugged with corporate indifference. Unfortunate, but not our problem. Family Services handles dependent children. We handle real estate acquisitions. He leaned forward, studying Jackson's face. You're not going soft on me, are you? Because if word gets out that Remington Capital has developed a conscience, it'll hurt our reputation. Clients hire us because we're ruthless, not because we're nice. The conversation was interrupted by Jackson's phone buzzing with a text from his doorman. Mr. Remington, there's a gentleman here asking about the Daniels children. Says he's their uncle. Jackson's heart raced. I have to go. Family emergency. Everything all right? I hope so, Jackson replied, though he wasn't sure if finding the twins' uncle would solve problems or create new ones. Daniel Carver was not what Jackson had expected. Where Jackson had imagined an irresponsible drifter, he found a weathered but clean-cut man in his early 40s, wearing work clothes and carrying a battered duffel bag. His resemblance to the twins was unmistakable, the same gray eyes, the same stubborn chin. Mr. Remington, Daniel said as they shook hands in the lobby. I came as soon as I heard about Margaret. I've been driving for 3 days straight from Sacramento. The social worker said they couldn't locate you. Daniel rubbed his face with exhaustion. I've been moving around picking up construction work where I can find it. Margaret and we had a falling out a few years ago. I was going through a rough patch, made some bad choices. She thought it was better if I stayed away from the kids until I got my life together. And have you? Gotten your life together? I've been sober for 18 months, if that's what you're asking. Got steady work now, a small apartment in Sacramento. I was planning to call Margaret next month, ask if I could see Luna and Leo for Christmas. His voice broke slightly. I never thought. I mean, she was only 73. I thought I had more time to make things right. Jackson studied the man's face, seeing genuine grief and regret. The twins mentioned you, but they said they didn't have your contact information. Margaret was protecting them. I don't blame her. When I was drinking, I wasn't someone who should be around children. But I've changed, Mr. Remington. I want to take care of them now. They rode the elevator up in silence. Jackson found himself hoping that Daniel would prove unsuitable somehow, giving him an excuse to keep the twins. In less than 24 hours, they had filled a void in his life he hadn't even known existed. Luna and Leo were in the living room building a fort out of Jackson's expensive throw pillows. They looked up as the adults entered, and Leo's face broke into a wide smile. "Uncle Danny." Both children rushed to embrace him, and Daniel sank to his knees, gathering them in his arms with tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here," he whispered. "I'm so sorry about Grandma." Watching the reunion, Jackson felt simultaneously happy for the children and bereft for himself. This was their real family. He was just a stranger who'd provided temporary shelter. That evening, after the twins were in bed, Jackson and Daniel sat in the study sharing a bottle of wine. Though Daniel only had a single glass, mindful of his sobriety. "I need to ask you something," Daniel said. "The social worker mentioned that Luna and Leo came to you specifically. How did they even know who you were?" Jackson had been dreading this question. "They were looking for the person who foreclosed on Margaret's house. That person was me." Daniel's glass stopped halfway to his lips. "I'm sorry, what?" "My investment firm handled the foreclosure. I didn't know it was Margaret until the children told me her name." "You're the one who kicked an elderly woman out of her home?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. "It was a business transaction. We offered payment plans, but she couldn't meet the terms. I had no idea who she was at the time." Daniel set down his glass and stood up, pacing to the window with barely controlled rage. "So let me get this straight. You foreclosed on my sister-in-law's house, forcing her into an unheated apartment where she died, and now you're playing the Good Samaritan with her grandchildren. It's not that simple, isn't it?" Daniel whirled around, his composure cracking. "Margaret raised those kids on her teacher's pension. She never asked for help from anyone. She was too proud. But when she couldn't make her house payments, instead of finding a way to help her, you threw her into the street." Jackson felt the weight of judgment made heavier by its accuracy. "You're right. I made a terrible mistake. I'm trying to make it right now." "Make it right? You can't bring Margaret back. You can't undo the fact that those children are orphans because of you." "I know that. But I can try to ensure they have a better future." Daniel laughed bitterly. "With blood money? You profit from destroying their security, then offer to buy them a new one." The accusation hit home because it was partially true. Jackson was trying to assuage his guilt with money, the only solution he knew. But was that really so wrong if it helped the children? "What would you have me do, Daniel?" "I can't change the past, but I can affect their future. I can pay for their education, make sure they never want for anything. What they want is their grandmother back. What they need is family, not a guilty stranger throwing money at the problem." "And what can you offer them? A one-bedroom apartment and construction wages? No college fund, no security, no opportunities." The words were out before Jackson could stop them, and he immediately regretted their cruelty. Daniel's face went white. "You're right," Daniel said quietly. "I can't offer them what you can. I can't buy them a future. All I can give them is love and the truth about who I am." Someone who made mistakes but is trying to do better. Jackson felt ashamed of his outburst. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." "Yes, you did. And maybe you're not entirely wrong. But here's what you need to understand, Mr. Remington, those kids don't need a benefactor. They need someone who will love them unconditionally even when they're not perfect, even when they disappoint you. Can you do that?" It was a fair question, and Jackson wasn't sure of the answer. He'd never loved anyone unconditionally. He'd never had to. "I'm willing to try," he said finally. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Margaret used to say that people reveal their true character in crisis. The question is, what kind of man are you going to choose to be now that you know the truth? The next few days passed in an uneasy truce. Daniel stayed in the guest room observing the dynamics between Jackson and the twins. There was genuine love there, but also awkwardness. The children clearly cared for both men, but they didn't know how to navigate the complex emotions swirling around them. When Daniel suggested they pack their things to leave that weekend, both children looked panicked. "Can't we stay a little longer?" Luna asked. "Uncle Danny, you could stay too. Mr. Remington has lots of rooms." Jackson saw an opportunity. "Why don't you both stay for a few more days? Give everyone time to adjust. You could use my guest room, Daniel." Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to take advantage." "You're not. These children have been through tremendous trauma. Rushing them into another big change might not be wise. What Jackson didn't say was that he needed time to figure out how to live with the guilt of what he'd done, time to determine what kind of man he wanted to be going forward. The next morning brought unwelcome news that would change everything. Victoria, Jackson's assistant, called with urgent information about the Riverside Properties development. "Jackson, we have a problem. The Sacramento Bee is running an investigative piece about predatory foreclosure practices. They specifically mention the Daniels case and Margaret's death. Apparently, someone tipped them off about her being a beloved retired teacher." Jackson's blood turned to ice. What exactly are they reporting? They're painting it as a David versus Goliath story. Elderly teacher versus ruthless investment firm. They have quotes from former students, details about her years of service, even a photo of her with some award. The reporter is asking for comment from Remington Capital Partners. Jackson closed his eyes. His worst fear was materializing public exposure of his role in Margaret's death, just as he was trying to build a relationship with her grandchildren. Who could have given them the story? "I don't know, but Jackson, there's more. The reporter has been asking questions about your personal involvement with the Daniels children. Someone told them you're currently housing them." Jackson's mind raced. Who knew about his connection to the twins? The social worker, the detective, Daniel, his doorman. Any number of people could have leaked the information. "Set up a meeting with our PR firm immediately. And get Richard on the phone. There's one more thing." The reporter specifically asked about Margaret Daniels being your former teacher. Someone gave them that information too. Jackson felt trapped. The careful separation between his business life and personal guilt was collapsing. Soon, everyone would know that Jackson Remington, master of the universe, had destroyed the woman who'd helped create him. When he told Daniel about the news story, the younger man's reaction was not what Jackson expected. "Good," Daniel said simply. "Maybe some public accountability will make you think twice before ruining other families. This will hurt the children too. Once this story breaks, they'll be in the spotlight. Reporters will want to interview them, photograph them. Is that what you want? What I want is justice for Margaret. She deserves to be remembered as more than just another foreclosure statistic." Jackson realized that Daniel might have been the source of the leak. "Did you talk to a reporter?" "No, but I should have. Margaret was a good woman who spent her life helping others. If her story can prevent this from happening to other families, then her death won't be completely meaningless." The conversation was interrupted by Luna's voice from the hallway. "Mr. Remington, there are people with cameras outside." Jackson's heart sank. The story had broken earlier than expected, and the media circus was already beginning. The next few days were a nightmare of media attention. Reporters camped outside Jackson's building, and the story dominated local news cycles. The narrative was exactly what Jackson had feared. Heartless millionaire destroys beloved teacher, then tries to buy redemption by playing savior to her orphaned grandchildren. The coverage was particularly damaging because it was largely accurate. Editorial cartoons showed Jackson as a vulture circling a schoolhouse. Op-ed pieces called him a symbol of everything wrong with modern capitalism. Social media exploded with hashtags and calls for boycotts of his firm. More devastating was the human interest angle. Interviews with Margaret's former students painted a picture of a woman who had devoted her life to nurturing young minds, often using her own money to help struggling families. The contrast with Jackson's wealth and callousness was stark. "Billionaire profits from teacher's death," read one headline. "From lunch money to blood money," read another. Richard was furious. "This is a disaster, Jackson. We're hemorrhaging clients. The Riverside Properties investors are threatening to pull out. The board is talking about forcing you to step down." "Maybe they should," Jackson replied. "Are you out of your mind? You built this company. You can't let some sob story destroy everything you've worked for." But Jackson was no longer sure what he'd worked for was worth preserving. A week into the media storm, Jackson received an unexpected visitor that would change everything. Detective Rodriguez returned, this time with a warrant and federal agents. "Mr. Remington, we need to search your computers and financial records. We're investigating allegations of predatory lending practices and potential securities fraud." Jackson's world tilted dangerously. "What allegations?" "Someone has provided evidence that Remington Capital Partners systematically targeted elderly homeowners and minority communities for foreclosure. using deceptive practices to inflate default rates. Margaret Daniels' case is just one of many. The federal investigation changed everything. Jackson's assets were frozen pending the inquiry. His passport was confiscated. The children's future, which had seemed secure just days ago, was suddenly uncertain. Agent Sarah Chun, the lead investigator, spread documents across Jackson's dining room table. "We have evidence of a pattern, Mr. Remington. Targeting vulnerable populations, inflating fees, accelerating foreclosure timelines. This goes far beyond standard business practices." Jackson stared at the files. Dozens of cases similar to Margaret's. Elderly homeowners, single mothers, recent immigrants, all systematically targeted and stripped of their homes. The human cost of his empire laid bare in black and white. "We estimate over 300 families were affected by these practices over the past 5 years. Agent Chun continued. "The total damages exceed $50 million. I never intended." "Intent doesn't matter, Mr. Remington. Impact does. 300 families lost their homes. Children were displaced. Lives were destroyed." Daniel found Jackson in his study that evening, staring at legal documents with hollow eyes. "The feds think this goes deeper than just Margaret's case? Apparently, someone's been collecting evidence for months, building a case that we deliberately targeted vulnerable populations." "Did you?" Jackson looked up from the papers. "Not consciously. We targeted properties with high profit potential and owners likely to default. If that disproportionately affected certain communities." He trailed off, realizing how that sounded. "Jesus, Jackson, do you hear yourself? You're talking about people's lives like they were just numbers on a spreadsheet." "That's exactly what they were to me," Jackson admitted. "Until I met Luna and Leo. Until I understood that every foreclosure represents a family destroyed, dreams crushed, lives derailed." Daniel sat down across from him. "The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" Before Jackson could answer, they were interrupted by shouting from the children's room. Both men rushed down the hall to find Luna in tears and Leo trying to comfort her. "What's wrong?" Jackson asked, kneeling beside the bed. "I had a bad dream," Luna sobbed. "I dreamed that Grandma was mad at me for living with the man who hurt her." Jackson's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Leo looked up with eyes too old for his 7 years. "We heard you and Uncle Danny talking. You're the one who took away Grandma's house, aren't you?" The moment Jackson had been dreading had arrived. The children knew the truth, and he could see the betrayal and confusion in their faces. Richard Hawthorne was arrested the next morning, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and racketeering. The federal investigation had uncovered a systematic scheme to target vulnerable homeowners using aggressive tactics and hidden fees to force defaults. Jackson's phone rang constantly, lawyers, reporters, investigators, clients demanding answers. He let most calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on the children who watched him with new wariness. The twins no longer climbed into his lap for stories. They stayed close to Daniel, viewing Jackson with the confusion of children trying to reconcile kindness with cruelty. Their trust, so freely given just days before, had evaporated like morning mist. "Yes," Jackson said quietly to Leo's question. "I am the one who took away Grandma's house." Luna's sobs intensified. "But you were nice to us. You gave us food and warm beds and read us stories. Why would you hurt Grandma if you're nice?" How could he explain the compartmentalization that had allowed him to be kind to children while destroying their guardian? How could he make them understand that he hadn't connected his business actions with their human consequences? "Sometimes grown-ups make terrible mistakes," he said finally. "I made decisions without thinking about how they would hurt people. I didn't know your grandmother personally when I made those decisions, but that's not an excuse. I was wrong, and I'm sorrier than I can ever express." "Are you going to take our house away too?" Leo asked with the practical fear of a child who had already lost everything once. "No, Leo. I'm going to make sure you always have a home. That's a promise." But even as he said it, Jackson wondered if it was a promise he could keep. With his assets frozen and criminal charges looming, his ability to provide for anyone was suddenly in question. The next few days were a careful dance of damaged relationships. Luna would approach Jackson tentatively, then remember what he'd done and retreat to Daniel's side. Leo watched everything with analytical eyes, trying to understand how the same person could be both protector and destroyer. "I need to take them away from here," Daniel told Jackson privately. This environment isn't healthy for them. All this legal drama, media attention, they need stability. Jackson nodded, though the thought of losing them felt like another death. Where will you go? Back to Sacramento. I've got steady work there, and there's a good elementary school near my apartment. I'll find a bigger place. What about money? School costs? Medical expenses? College funds? Daniel's jaw tightened. We'll manage. We don't need your money, Jackson. It's tainted. It's just money. It can't be inherently good or evil, can't it? Every dollar you've offered us came from destroying families like ours. How many other Margaret Daniels are there? How many other Luna and Leos? The question haunted Jackson because he didn't know the answer. How many lives had Remington Capital Partners destroyed in pursuit of profit? How many children had lost their homes, their security, their sense of safety in the world? That afternoon, Jackson made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. He called his attorney and instructed him to cooperate fully with the federal investigation, providing all documents and testimony requested. Jackson, that's suicide, his lawyer protested. With your cooperation, they'll build an airtight case against you. You could face decades in prison. Good, Jackson replied. Maybe that's what I deserve. But first, he had one more thing to accomplish. Something that might help Luna and Leo understand that people could change, that redemption was possible even after terrible mistakes. The twins found him that evening in his study writing by hand on yellow legal paper. They approached cautiously, still uncertain about this man who had been both their savior and their destroyer. What are you writing? Luna asked. A letter, Jackson replied. To all the families my company hurt. An apology. Will that bring Grandma back? Leo asked with devastating directness. No, Leo. Nothing can bring her back. But maybe it can help other grandmas keep their homes. Luna climbed into the chair beside him, studying his handwriting. Grandma always said that when we make mistakes, we have to try to fix them, even if we can't make them perfect again. Your grandmother was a very wise woman. Are you going to jail? Leo asked. Jackson set down his pen and looked at both children. Probably yes. For how long? I don't know. Maybe a very long time. Luna's eyes filled with tears. But then who will take care of us? Uncle Danny will take care of you. He loves you very much. And he's a good man who's learned from his mistakes, just like I'm trying to learn from mine. Will we ever see you again? Leo asked. Jackson felt his heart breaking. I hope so. But even if you don't, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You reminded me what it means to be human. That night, as Jackson tucked them in for what might be the last time, Luna grabbed his hand. Mr. Remington? Even though you hurt Grandma, I still love you. Is that wrong? Jackson kissed her forehead, tasting salt from his own tears. No, sweetheart, that's not wrong. That's grace. And it's the most beautiful thing in the world. Jackson spent his potentially last free evening writing letters, one for Luna, one for Leo, and one for Daniel. In them, he tried to explain the inexplicable. How a man could be both villain and protector, destroyer and savior. To Luna, he wrote about the importance of kindness, reminding her that even when adults failed, children could choose to be better. To Leo, he emphasized the value of integrity, of always doing what was right even when it was difficult. To Daniel, he wrote something different entirely, a confession of every detail about Margaret's foreclosure, and a plea to help the children understand that people could change. The next morning, Jackson called a press conference. Standing before cameras and reporters, he did something unprecedented in the corporate world. He told the complete truth. My name is Jackson Remington, and I am responsible for the death of Margaret Daniels. The room erupted in chaos, but Jackson continued with steady resolve. Mrs. Daniels was my first-grade teacher 42 years ago. She helped a hungry, angry boy believe he could make something of himself. She paid for my lunches when my mother couldn't afford them. She saw potential in me and nurtured it with patience and love. Jackson's voice cracked, but he pressed on through the storm of camera flashes. Last month, my company foreclosed on Mrs. Daniels' home. She fell behind on payments when her pension was reduced. We offered payment plans she couldn't afford, then forced her from the house she'd lived in for 23 years. She died in an unheated apartment, and her grandchildren came to me seeking the man who had destroyed their security. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the mechanical whir of cameras. That man was me. The boy Mrs. Daniels had helped grow up to be someone significant. I used her gifts to become exactly the kind of person who would destroy her. Jackson pulled out the canvas bag of coins Luna had given him that first night, setting it on the podium with reverent care. These are $11, Mrs. Daniels saved from her medicine money to pay what she thought she owed me. $11 from a woman who never owed me anything, who had already given me more than I could ever repay. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the room. I am announcing the immediate dissolution of Remington Capital Partners. All assets not needed for restitution will be placed in a trust for the education and welfare of children like Luna and Leo Daniels, children whose families have been destroyed by predatory lending practices. The room exploded with questions, but Jackson raised his hand for silence. I make no excuses for my actions. I accept full responsibility for the harm I've caused. Margaret Daniels deserved better from the boy she helped raise. Her grandchildren deserved better from the man who claimed to care about them. Jackson looked directly into the camera, knowing Luna and Leo might be watching. Luna, Leo, if you're watching this, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You reminded me what it means to be human. Your grandmother would be proud of the compassionate, brilliant children you're becoming. Don't let my failures dim your light. He stepped away from the podium as reporters shouted questions, but Jackson had said everything that mattered. The rest would be decided by courts and consequences. The press conference went viral within hours. Jackson's admission of guilt and announcement of restitution dominated news cycles worldwide. Legal experts called it either the most honorable act in corporate history or the most expensive confession ever recorded. The federal investigators were stunned. Defendants rarely offered such complete cooperation, especially when it guaranteed their conviction. Jackson's testimony and document production revealed the full scope of Remington Capital Partners' predatory practices, implicating dozens of other firms and potentially helping thousands of victims. Back at the penthouse, Daniel watched the press conference with the twins. Luna cried during Jackson's message to them while Leo sat in thoughtful silence. Is Mr. Remington going to jail? Luna asked through her tears. Probably, Daniel replied with gentle honesty. For how long? I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe a very long time. Leo looked up at his uncle with those penetrating gray eyes. Uncle Danny, was Mr. Remington good or bad? It was the question Daniel had been wrestling with himself. I think he was a person who did bad things but is trying to be good now. Sometimes people make terrible mistakes, but they can still choose to do better. Like you did? When you stopped drinking and came to take care of us. Daniel felt a stab of recognition. He and Jackson weren't so different, both men who had caused harm through their choices, both trying to find redemption through love and sacrifice. That evening, Jackson returned to the apartment for what he knew would be the last time. Federal marshals would arrest him in the morning, beginning a legal process that would likely end with a lengthy prison sentence. He found the twins in the living room, their belongings packed for the trip to Sacramento. Luna ran to him as she had that first night, wrapping her arms around his waist with fierce determination. Are you really going away forever? She asked. Jackson knelt to her level, memorizing every detail of her face. I have to go away for a while, yes. But I'll always love you and I'll always be proud of who you're becoming. Will you write to us? If your uncle says it's okay and if you want me to. Leo approached more cautiously, his internal struggle visible in his expression. Mr. Remington? I'm still mad at you for hurting Grandma. But I'm also sad that you're leaving. It's okay to feel both things, Leo. Sometimes the world is complicated that way. Daniel stepped forward, holding the letter Jackson had written to him. Jackson, I've been thinking about what you said in your letter to me. Jackson had written to Daniel about the trust fund he was establishing, asking him to consider serving as a trustee to ensure the money was used properly for the children's benefit. I don't want your money, Daniel continued, but I've realized that my pride shouldn't hurt Luna and Leo's future. If you're serious about this trust fund, I'll oversee it. Make sure it's used for their education and genuine needs, not as a substitute for love and attention. Jackson nodded gratefully, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank you. That means everything to me. As the evening wound down, Jackson tucked the twins into bed one last time. The ritual felt sacred now, knowing it might be years before he could do it again. Luna grabbed his hand as he kissed her forehead. Mr. Remington? Grandma used to say that sometimes people have to go through really hard things to become who they're supposed to be. Maybe jail is your hard thing, and when you come out you'll be exactly who you're supposed to be. The wisdom of a 7-year-old delivered with the same gentle insight that Margaret Daniels had once shown a troubled boy in her classroom. The next morning, Jackson surrendered himself to federal authorities. The media circus was intense but brief. He refused interviews, made no statements, simply walked into the courthouse with dignity intact. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Jackson's cooperation and full confession expedited the process. He was sentenced to 12 years for fraud and racketeering, though his cooperation with federal investigators had likely prevented a life sentence. The restitution fund he'd established grew to over $200 million, helping thousands of families recover from predatory lending practices. Daniel, true to his word, served as a trustee, ensuring the money was used ethically and effectively. More importantly, Daniel proved to be exactly the guardian Luna and Leo needed. Within 6 months, he'd found a larger apartment in Sacramento, enrolled the children in excellent schools, and begun building the stable family life they deserved. Jackson received regular updates through carefully monitored prison correspondence. School performances, soccer games, birthday parties, the normal childhood experiences he'd helped make possible through his downfall. The irony wasn't lost on him. His greatest failure had become his most meaningful success. 5 years later, Jackson sat in the visitor's room of the Federal Correctional Facility in upstate New York, reading a letter from Leo. The boy, now 12, wrote about his middle school science fair project on renewable energy. His writing was clear and thoughtful, showing the same intellectual curiosity that Margaret had once nurtured in Jackson himself. Luna's letter, filled with drawings of horses and stories about her ballet classes, lay beside Leo's on the metal table. Both children wrote regularly, their letters a bright spot in Jackson's otherwise austere existence. Jackson had been sentenced to 12 years, but his time was productive. He taught financial literacy to other inmates, worked in the prison library, and spent countless hours writing a memoir about corporate responsibility and personal redemption. The book, when published, would donate all proceeds to foreclosure prevention programs. The restitution fund continued to grow and help families. Daniel sent quarterly reports showing how the money was being used to provide legal aid, financial counseling, and emergency assistance to families facing foreclosure. Margaret's death had prevented hundreds of other tragedies. Prison had stripped away everything Jackson thought defined him, his wealth, his power, his reputation. What remained was something he'd never possessed before, genuine peace. He'd found purpose in helping others, meaning in service rather than acquisition. "Remington, you have a visitor," announced the guard. Jackson looked up in surprise. It wasn't a scheduled visit day. He was even more surprised to see Daniel waiting in the visitor's room, looking older but healthier than Jackson remembered. "Hello, Jackson?" "Daniel. This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "The children are fine. Better than fine. Luna made honor roll again, and Leo's been accepted into a special program for gifted students. They're both thriving." Jackson felt the familiar mixture of pride and regret. "I'm glad. They deserve every opportunity." Daniel leaned forward across the scarred table. "They want to see you." Jackson's heart jumped. "I thought you felt it was better if they maintained distance." "I understood. They're old enough now to make their own decisions about relationships. And they've never stopped asking about you." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That you made terrible mistakes but that you're working to make amends. That people can change, that redemption is possible." Daniel paused, studying Jackson's face. "I told them that you loved them enough to sacrifice everything to try to make things right." Jackson felt tears threatening, an emotional response that had become more common during his incarceration, as if prison had stripped away the armor he'd built around his heart. "Would you like me to arrange a visit?" Daniel asked. Jackson wiped his eyes, not caring about the vulnerability it showed. "More than anything. But only if you're sure it's what's best for them." "Jackson, those kids have been carrying around questions about you for 5 years. They need to see for themselves that you're okay, that you're still the man who read them bedtime stories and made them feel safe after their world collapsed." "I'm not sure I'm that man anymore." Daniel smiled with something that looked like forgiveness. "Maybe you're something better now. Maybe you're who Margaret always saw in that angry little boy in her classroom." The visit was arranged for the following month. Jackson spent weeks preparing, unsure what to expect from children who were now 10 and 11 years old. Would they remember him fondly, or would 5 years of distance have crystallized their anger about his role in their grandmother's death? When the day arrived, Jackson's hands shook as he entered the visitor's room. Luna and Leo sat at a table with Daniel, both taller and more mature than in his memories, but unmistakably the same children who had changed his life. Luna saw him first and jumped up, running across the room to embrace him. Leo followed more cautiously, but his hug was just as tight. "We missed you," Luna said simply. "I missed you too. Both of you. Every single day." They spent 2 hours together, talking about school, friends, and dreams for the future. Leo wanted to study engineering like his uncle Danny. Luna dreamed of becoming a teacher like her grandmother. "I want to help kids the way Grandma Margaret helped you," she explained with the earnestness of childhood conviction. "And the way you helped us. Even after everything I did wrong? Especially because of that," Leo said with wisdom beyond his years. "You showed us that people can change. That mistakes don't have to define you forever." Jackson felt something shift in his chest, a final release of the guilt he'd carried for so long. These children who had every right to hate him had instead chosen forgiveness and love. As the visit ended, Luna pressed a handmade card into his hands. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for loving us enough to tell the truth. Grandma would be proud of who you're becoming." The words sustained Jackson through his remaining years of incarceration. He threw himself into prison programs, helping other inmates prepare for re-entry into society. He completed his memoir, which became a bestseller and funded dozens of foreclosure prevention programs. Most importantly, he maintained regular contact with Luna and Leo, watching them grow into remarkable young people through letters, phone calls, and quarterly visits. Daniel had married a kindergarten teacher named Maria, giving the children a stable family unit that Jackson had helped make possible. The irony wasn't lost on him. His greatest act of destruction had led to his most meaningful creation. Jackson was released after serving 8 years of his sentence, his time reduced for good behavior and his continued cooperation with ongoing investigations into predatory lending practices. He emerged into a world that had largely moved on from the scandal that had once dominated headlines. The first thing he saw as he walked through the prison gates was a familiar gray sedan. Luna, now 15 and startlingly beautiful, leaned against the passenger door. Leo, 13 and already taller than his sister, stood beside her with a homemade "Welcome Home" sign. Daniel and Maria waited by the driver's door, both smiling nervously. Jackson had imagined this moment countless times during his incarceration, but reality was overwhelming. These children he'd helped raise, who had been 7-year-old orphans when he met them, were now teenagers with their own personalities, dreams, and futures. Luna ran to him first, wrapping him in a hug that felt like forgiveness itself. Leo followed more cautiously, but his embrace was just as tight. "We missed you," Luna said simply. "I missed you too. Both of you. Every single day." The drive to Daniel's house was filled with chatter about school, friends, and plans for the future. Leo wanted to study engineering at UC Davis. Luna dreamed of attending Stanford to become a teacher. "I want to help kids the way Grandma Margaret helped you," she explained. "And the way you helped us." At Daniel's house, a modest but comfortable home in a Sacramento suburb, Jackson was introduced to the life the twins had built. Photographs covered the refrigerator: soccer games, school plays, family vacations. A life filled with ordinary joys and challenges, the kind of stable childhood he'd never experienced himself. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table sharing stories, Jackson felt a peace he'd never known. He was no longer the master of the financial universe, no longer the feared predator of Wall Street. He was simply a man who had learned, through tremendous loss and hard-won wisdom, what really mattered. "So what's next for you?" Daniel asked as they cleaned up after dinner. Jackson had given this considerable thought during his final months in prison. "I want to work with families facing foreclosure. Help them navigate the system, understand their rights. Maybe prevent other Margaret Daniels situations. The Kids Trust Fund could support that work," Daniel suggested. "Turn it into something that helps other families too." Jackson looked at Luna and Leo, now doing homework at the kitchen table where he'd once made million-dollar deals. "What do you think? Would your grandmother approve of using some of the money to help other families keep their homes?" Luna looked up from her algebra textbook. "Grandma always said the best way to honor someone's memory is to keep their work alive. She helped kids learn and grow. If we can help families stay together, that seems like the same thing." Leo nodded agreement. "Plus, it might stop other kids from losing their grandmas." Jackson felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but now it came from gratitude rather than guilt. These children who had every right to hate him had instead chosen forgiveness and purpose. Over the following months, Jackson established the Margaret Daniels Foundation, funded by the Restitution Trust and dedicated to preventing predatory lending practices. He worked long hours for no salary, finding satisfaction in helping families navigate financial crises rather than creating them. Luna and Leo visited regularly, sharing their lives with the man who had first destroyed their world, then helped rebuild it. They called him Uncle Jackson now, and he cherished the title more than any corporate honor he'd ever received. On the 5th anniversary of Margaret Daniels' death, Jackson stood in the small cemetery in Queens where she was buried. Luna and Leo stood beside him, now college-bound seniors with bright futures ahead of them. They'd brought flowers, sunflowers, Margaret's favorites. "Do you think she forgives us?" Luna asked quietly. Jackson looked at the simple headstone. Margaret Daniels, beloved teacher, devoted grandmother. Below the dates was an inscription. She saw potential in every child. "I think she's proud of who you've become," Jackson replied. "Both of you represent the best of her legacy." "What about you?" Leo asked. "Do you think she forgives you?" Jackson knelt and placed his own bouquet on the grave. 11 white roses, one for each dollar in that canvas bag that had changed his life. "I hope so," he said. "But more importantly, I think she'd be glad that her death wasn't meaningless, that it led to something better." As they walked away from the cemetery, Luna slipped her hand into Jackson's. A gesture of acceptance and love that meant more to him than all the wealth he'd once possessed. Margaret Daniels had seen potential in a troubled boy and nurtured it with patience and kindness. Decades later, that same potential had nearly destroyed everything good in the world. But love, the love of 2 orphan children and the wisdom of their devoted guardian, had finally guided that potential toward its intended purpose. Jackson Remington had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true success wasn't measured in dollars accumulated, but in lives uplifted, families protected, and futures secured through sacrifice and service. The angry, hungry boy Margaret had helped feed was finally becoming the man she'd always believed he could be. And in a small cemetery in Queens, beneath the falling snow that reminded him of that first desperate night when 2 children had changed his life forever, Jackson felt something he'd never experienced before, the quiet satisfaction of a debt truly repaid.